Weekend Modder here with a tutorial video for how to read and write the NAND of an Xbox 360 phat console. When I refer to a phat console, I mean one that physically looks like this image that I'm putting up on screen. So no matter the color, white, black, special edition, red, whatever, anything that's in this general form factor is a phat console and will look approximately like this on the inside. So this is the motherboard torn down, opened up, just removed to its most basic component. If we back up here just a little bit, you can see it's the entire motherboard. There's tons of videos out there for how to take the case off and get to this point. So all I've really done here is just removed the entire, this is the console from its casing and housing and made it a little bit easier to work with. So the goal of what we're trying to teach today, as I get my camera set, is how to interact with the NAND on this console. The reasons you might care about this are because you might need to flash the NAND. So if you intend to JTAG a console, if you intend to RGH a console, if you have a JTAG or RGH console that you have flashed incorrectly and bricked, this process will allow you to read and write to the NAND via hardware and rewrite a correct or good NAND. The chip that we're actually reading and writing to is this chip. This is the NAND itself. And then these are the two headers that we're going to interact with here. So you can see this header. It's referred to as the J1D2 header here. And then you can see this header. This is the J2B1 header. Both of these will need to interact with in order to read and write to the NAND here. So the first step, you can see me pointing with it here, is to use what I refer to as a fiberglass scratch pin. This is a pin that has a weird kind of bristly end. If I can hold this still enough to show you. So it has kind of a fiberglass bristled end. You can purchase these on Amazon, eBay. If you search the term fiberglass scratch pin, you'll see a lot of these. They come in different colors. They're $5 basically. But this will help us take the coating off of the top of these connectors that we're going to solder through. Also, don't worry if yours look a little different than this. If yours are through hole and don't have any solder in them, that's okay. They still probably have the coating on top where they're kind of dull looking. What this scratch pin does, if I go ahead and get in here without bumping my camera, is the scratch pin allows me to kind of take that top layer or top coating off. So I'm not going to go crazy aggressive with it, but I'm just going to take that top coating, top layer off. So I'm just going to rub it around a little bit here. So you can see how it's kind of looks a little shinier under there. Now what I'm going to do is just grab out of my bin off camera here, just one of these little cotton pads. Pick these up at the dollar store, splash it with a little bit of isopropyl alcohol, and then just rub that right over it. And you can see how kind of nice and shiny these are now. So their metal is exposed and will take solder much easier. So now the next step is, again, the second header that we have to deal with. This one is stuck between these two capacitors. So let's make sure that we are careful and we don't damage that. But I'm going to come in here. Let's see if I can do this again. I need to raise my camera a bit. Sorry, guys. I'm trying to get you some good level of detail here, but I need it out of the way. So here's the header again. I'm going to just get in there with my my scratch pin, and then it's just a twist to increase the length of the stuff that's exposed here. I'm going to get in and run that over, kind of change directions, and get it all polished up there, and then take my same little pad with some rubbing alcohol and just kind of clean up right there. And now again you can see that those are nice and shiny and they're ready to take some solder. So the next thing that we need to do is to go ahead and identify where exactly we need to solder. For that, I'm going to show you an image on the PC. Alright, so here we are picking up on the PC. You can see that I've got JRunner open. I do want to comment on the fact that I've got a new version available thing here. I have not upgraded because I did do the upgrade once, and it didn't like to interact with my JRunner. I'm running Windows 10 So it messed up how it worked with my Nandex and stuff. So I am running one version back, which I think is JRunner 283 is what it shows up as, is labeled in my stuff. Let me see here. So tools, JRunner 283 core pack is what this is labeled as here. You can see that. All right, so inside the JRunner program, if you've downloaded this and you've got a reasonably current version, you can click this Images tab, and you can come here to the Nandex phat install image. And what this is going to pop up for you is an image of exactly what we're looking at here. Let me resize it just a little, take the zoom off. Let's see if that helps. Yeah, I can just fit it in now. So what you can see here is the same headers that we've been looking at on the console, the J1D2 header. So you see these 5 highlighted, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, black, brown, red, orange, and yellow. And then 6 and 7, green and blue. So these tell us what headers or what areas we need to solder which wires to. And this is going to be true for any Nandex or JRunner, or excuse me, JR programmer V1 or V2. However, if you also notice here, what we've got is an explanation of what each of these signals is. So there's the MOSI, the SS, the SCK, MSO, G&D. So if you pick up another programmer, like for instance what's that generic matrix one, they're labeled like this, or they may even be labeled by the Xbox header. They might be labeled J1D2 1, J1D2 2, J1D2 3, J1D2 4, etc., etc. And over here, again, you can see J2B1, this would be 1, and then see how this one's labeled 2 on the board? So J2B1 1, J2B1 2, J2B1 3, J2B1 4, and so this is actually J2B1 5, J2B1 6. So even though they're labeled 6 and 7, that's to correspond with this labeling, not that it actually corresponds with the number of the pin in the header. You can always just, again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. See how 12 is labeled, and then 13 in this corner. So that's how you know you can get your pin numbering correct based on the header. From there, we know where to get that image at, and we'll head back to the console to actually do the soldering in. All right, back to the console, and to get to the real-world soldering, so we've what we call scrapped or scraped, or however you want to say it, the traces with the fiberglass pin. We've exposed the contacts. Now what we're going to go ahead and do is apply a little bit of flux. This is flux that I purchased in bulk from eBay. I think it's probably knockoff. It says that it's Amtech, but it's just tacky flux. So you can see this is all exposed, and it actually holds its form a little bit, and you know, it'll move around, but it's like tacky or paste flux. So I've got a little bit. My kid squeezed this and squeezed it out, so I'm just going to apply just kind of some of what he squeezed out there. That's more than enough to do the whole thing, so what I'm going to do here is now just reach in with a Q-tip and pick up a little bit of that stuff and then spread it out over here on this side. The flux is chemically, I can't give you a full great explanation. Essentially, it helps with the bonding of the soldering, helps flux the solder not to adhere to itself so much, so that when you're soldering 2 points that are really close together, that the flux will flow separately to each contact point rather than adhere in a big giant glob. So reference back to that image as much as you need to here, but now the next step we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and apply some solder and pre-tin all of the connections that we're going to need to make. This is so that later on, when we insert our wire to it, all we have to do is apply just a tiny bit of heat. The solder that's already on the area will flow to the wire and form a strong bond quickly without doing any sort of damage. So pre-tinning the area, this is a critical step. So I've got my nice hot soldering iron here. My tip's not shiny at all, so I'm going to go ahead and apply some flux to the end of it here, get it nice and shiny, and then clean that off with one of my copper meshes. I use a Hacko station 599B. This has just got some copper mesh in it that you stick the soldering iron into, and it just kind of cleans off the solder. Gives you a nice clean surface to work with. So the first header that I'm going to do is going to be this one here, and I like to just hit them without touching those capacitors. So I just apply some heat for a second, and then let the solder flow in, and bam, so you get a nice clean solder ball right there on the point, not touching anything else. And we'll do the same thing over here. Nice clean solder ball. The shininess of the flux can sometimes make it difficult to tell whether or not your solder's touching each other. The default probably would be, if you're using the flux, that it should stay apart separately and be okay. You can see how this one is kind of turning a dull color. People refer to that as a cold solder joint. In my experience, it hasn't really affected anything as far as NAND read writing, because this is not a permanent thing. You can use more flux to avoid that, but it's just fine as far as that's concerned. So we're going to do the next point, which is over the top of that next one, and then the one beside it. Got to hold the heat to it a little bit more. Alright, I'm going to be careful again to stay away from these capacitors. And then the last one, I always remember the yellow one that comes up. This is actually ground. And ground on these boxes has a larger plane, so it absorbs more heat. So you frequently have to hold the iron to this last point, this ground one, even longer before the solder will flow to it. So I'm holding my point to that point. I haven't even applied any solder to the iron yet. And then I'm going to go ahead and start to flow some. And I'm going to have to continue to hold my iron there while I do it. And then you can see the solder has started to adhere. And I can just tack on a little bit more, and now I've got solder flown or flowed to the point, however you want to say that. So the next one, we're going to go up to this header, and the way that I do it is I just count the number of empty pins. So it was 2 empty, and then on the third, and then up and down from there. So I just run my iron over that a little bit to melt the flux. We go 1, 2, and then the third one, and we'll just flow some solder to that point. And then 1, 2, and the third one, or just directly down from the first one that we did. And then we've flowed some solder to that point. So now we've got solder points all nice and clean and done up. The next thing that we're going to do is solder in our wires that are going to talk to our programmer. So you can see here, I've got a standard JRunner or Nandex. If you're going to do a bunch of these, I would suggest you do what I do. Is I coated the wires towards the connector in hot glue and then wrapped them in electrical tape to give it some sturdiness, because plugging and unplugging this a million times, it really does start to wear out. From here, you can see that these wires are color-coded. The color code matches exactly with that image diagram. Again, remember how I talked about referencing them and it being different for different programmers. This is going to be your most common color scheme, because most people are using either old Nandexes, if they still have them, or pretty much the only programmer you can buy these days is the JR Programmer or the JR Programmer V2. So, with that said, I like to start soldering those, starting with the blue and green at the very top. Green goes on top. Again, we can reference that image that we saw in JRunner. Also, just as I can point out here, I've got the wire with a little bit of heat shield, and then it goes to the legs. I've clipped off some resistors. That's just because I reuse these wires over and over and over. These legs off the resistors are just sturdier than stranded wire. It's actually a solid piece of like metal, and I've just soldered it to the wire and then wrap that in heat shrink tubing just to make these stand up a little better. You can do the same if you want, or you can just use the wire. Just remember to pre-tin, meaning apply some solder to the end of your stranded wire first if you're going to do that. So, on to the actual work. Take your green wire, which goes in the upper one, and all you're going to have to do is just reheat that solder that you already flowed and basically just jam your wire in there. Physical force not really required, jam being more of an expression there. But, you know, wire directly into the solder here. And 1 second, we'll resume with the other 5 points. All right, sorry for the interruption there. On to the other wires. So again, I like to just pick one and be consistent and start with it. So I always start with the black. So we can see my black wire here. Or now you can. In the lower left corner, as I look at the video at least. It's always more difficult to do this with the camera. So again, I'm just touching the solder ball that's there and then pushing my wire into it. Next wire being brown. So there's my, if I could stop bumping my camera mount. Sorry about that, guys. Next wire is brown. Looks a little reddish, and I have color blindness issues. We'll stop that and see if I can. All right, so brown. Oh, I didn't let the solder get hard again before I pulled away my iron, or before I let go of the wire. Solder takes a moment to harden because this is leaded stuff that has a lower temperature. Alright, so there's those two. Next one up is red. So here's my red, and then come in from the side. And this is where having that wire end on the end of there too, the resistor leg, because it's a little bit more sturdy, so I can kind of point and jab into. And again, I say jab, but it's a gentle thing. And then orange. So that one's there. And then yellow into this one. And again, because that's ground, it does take more heat to go ahead and melt that, and I just make sure that it's got a good firm connection there. I can tug on it just a little bit. You don't yank on it with a lot of force. But now we've got a successful connection to the pin header, and we've got our plug here. So what we can do is we're going to plug the console into power. So we'll connect the power supply. We will not turn the console on. At this point, what I recommend is this is where the ring of light board connects. So normally this is plugged in here, like so. And that's where your power switch, your on-off button is. Just leave that out entirely at this point. There's no reason for you to have it because you don't need to turn the console on. Make sure you don't have any USBs plugged into it or anything like that. Go ahead and connect power. So we want basically standby power. And then connect your programmer to your USB, and then your programmer to this. So basically we're connecting everything up to the computer, and we'll pick up with the real simple command in JRunner one second. All right, so we've got our programmer soldered in. We've got it connected. You can see my NandX devices here. If I disconnect the USB, NandX disappears. If I reconnect it, it reappears. So you can tell that the NandX is in. What we can do now here is come over here next to the motherboard and hit this nice little question mark. What this does is it just sends a command without actually reading the NAND. It sends a command to check the flash config and verify what we have. So the flash config came back 000 or 01 blah blah blah, whatever this is, and it says Falcon or Opus. We know from identifying this motherboard previously, or I do, that this one is a Falcon. So I could actually now hit read NAND. I do want to show you quickly before I do that what would happen. So I'm going to unplug the programmer from the wires that are soldered to the console. So the USB programmer is still connected. You can see that. And if I hit this query again, what you see here is this flash config 0000. If you get this upon your attempt with everything connected properly, this is telling you that it can't talk to the motherboard, it can't talk to the NAND, it doesn't understand what's going on. This is 98% of the time an indication of your soldering. Double check your soldering, make sure nothing's bridged, make sure all the wires are done into the right place. So again, I'm going to reconnect my wires that are soldered to my motherboard back to my NandX or JR programmer. This would be an interchangeable process. And I'm going to hit the query again. And you can see again that I've got my good flash config that tells me it's a Falcon. I'm going to go ahead and hit read NAND. And over here this input name pops up. I can just leave it blank, hit OK. And you can see that we've initiated a progress run of reading the NAND. and it tells you it's outputting it to nanddump1.bin. Also, because over here I've got reads to set, after it does the first read, it'll actually just start an immediate another read and name it nanddump2. You can also hit this show working folder, and here you'll get the location of where it's storing that file. So this is the file that's being written to currently right now as we speak. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you can dump the NAND or read and write with the NAND. If you were writing a file, it would be really simple. You'd select the bin file that you're writing, a updflash.bin or whatever. You'd select that as source, and then you'd click write NAND instead of read NAND. It's pretty basic as far as the reading and writing. But just use this little question mark first. Make sure your flash config comes up. Always do make sure you have backups before you overwrite anything. Make sure you've got good copies, that sort of thing. And I wish you luck. I hope this helped. Thanks, guys. Haha, tricked you. So I wanted to follow up real quick and just offer a little bit of information about bad blocks. This is going to be a common question and common thing that you can see is that you'll see this bad block found at, and it'll give a location. So what a bad block is, to my understanding, is essentially like physically on the actual electrons of the chip or whatever physical item that happens, is for whatever reason the switch that stores the data, the binary zeros and ones, whatever, the bit, the byte, whatever size it is, cannot actually store data. But they know that this happens. It's a known issue with flash memory or NAND flash, whatever this is, and they basically plan in extra data. So what you see is bad block ID here, found at this location, so they remap it to this block with this offset. So essentially what they're saying is, hey, we can't use this location to store data, this bad one, so we've relocated it to this location where we do have extra place to store data. I've never run into a NAND that had enough bad blocks that it actually was an issue, but something like 10 or 15 is the most I've ever seen on a single NAND. 1, 2, 5 is pretty common. As long as you still at the end, after taking 2 NAND reads, you get NANDs are the same and that they both failed and remapped the same way, then you're totally good. So if you see an output like this, but there's like 10 of these, and at the end you still see NANDs are the same, you're still good to go. JRunner is going to handle that bad block remapping all on its own. It's not going to cause any problems. And just to highlight that 1/2 more second, is if you go up, you can see this was the first read, so the NAND dump 1, and it had an error reading block 23F. And then you can scroll here to NAND dump 2, and you can see that it had an error reading block 23F. So they both had the same error. They're the same file, which is why we get the NANDs are the same. It remapped them. It's all good to go. When we create our new NANDs, which isn't really covered in this, it will automatically account for this within that creation and be totally fine.